Jessica Radcliffe had always felt a deep connection to the ocean. Growing up in the coastal town of Whitby, England, she spent countless hours watching the waves crash against the rocky shores. Her childhood was filled with dreams of swimming, with dolphins and exploring the mysteries beneath the surface. At 28, Jessica worked as a marine biology researcher at the local aquarium, where she studied the behavior of sea creatures and educated visitors about ocean conservation. The morning of July 15th started like any other summer day. Jessica arrived at the aquarium early, her long auburn hair tied back in a practical ponytail, ready for another day of research. She had been working on a special project involving Orca communication patterns, spending weeks analyzing underwater recordings from the North Sea. The killer whales rarely came close to the British coast, but recent reports suggested a pod had been spotted near the Orkney Islands. Jessica's supervisor, Dr. Margaret Fleming, approached her desk with exciting news. A fishing vessel had reported unusual orca activity just 20 miles offshore from Whitby. The captain claimed to have seen at least 6 adult orcas displaying hunting behaviors near a group of seals. This was unprecedented for the area, and Dr. Fleming wanted Jessica to join an emergency research expedition that afternoon. The opportunity thrilled Jessica beyond words. She had studied orcas for years, but had never encountered them in their natural habitat. These magnificent creatures, weighing up to 6 tons and reaching speeds of 35 miles per hour, represented the pinnacle of ocean intelligence and power. Their complex social structures and hunting strategies fascinated her, and she had written numerous papers about their communication methods. As Jessica prepared for the expedition, she carefully checked her diving equipment. Her wetsuit, breathing apparatus, and underwater camera were all in perfect condition. She had logged over 500 diving hours and felt completely comfortable in deep water. The research vessel, HMS Endeavour, was scheduled to depart at 2 o'clock, giving her just enough time to review the latest sonar readings and weather reports. The crew consisted of 5 experienced marine researchers and Captain Thomas Wright, a seasoned sailor who had navigated these waters for over 30 years. Captain Wright briefed the team about the ocean conditions, explaining that the weather was ideal for their mission. The sea was calm, visibility was excellent, and the wind was minimal. Perfect conditions for observing marine life. Jessica felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as they sailed away from the harbor. The familiar coastline grew smaller behind them, replaced by the endless expanse of the North Sea. She stood at the bow of the vessel, breathing in the salt air and watching for any signs of marine activity. Seabirds circled overhead, occasionally diving into the water to catch fish, their cries echoing across the waves. 2 hours into the journey, the sonar equipment began picking up large signatures beneath the surface. Dr. Fleming called everyone to the monitoring station, where the screen displayed several moving objects approximately 40 feet below the vessel. The shapes were too large to be fish and moved with the coordinated patterns characteristic of a whale pod. Jessica's heart raced with anticipation as she realized they had found their target. Captain Wright reduced the vessel's speed and activated the underwater cameras. The water was remarkably clear, allowing them to see almost 60 feet down. Suddenly, a massive black and white shape glided gracefully beneath the boat. Jessica gasped in amazement as she got her first glimpse of a wild orca. The creature was even more magnificent than she had imagined, its powerful body moving through the water with effortless grace. More orcas appeared, and Jessica counted 7 adults and 2 juveniles swimming in a tight formation. They seemed curious about the research vessel, occasionally surfacing near the boat to observe the humans watching them. Jessica quickly began taking photographs and recording their vocalizations, documenting every detail of this extraordinary encounter. The pod appeared to be hunting, working together to herd a school of fish into a concentrated area. As the afternoon progressed, Jessica became completely absorbed in her observations. She noted the different personalities within the pod, the way they communicated through clicks and whistles, and their sophisticated hunting strategies. One particularly large female, which Jessica estimated to be at least 25 feet long, seemed to be the leader of the group. This matriarch directed the movements of the other orcas with subtle signals and vocalizations. The research team decided to extend their observation period, hoping to gather more data about the pod's behavior. Jessica suggested using the underwater microphone array to record their complex songs and calls. These vocalizations could provide valuable insights into orca communication and help scientists understand how different pods develop their unique dialects. As the sun began to set, painting the ocean in shades of gold and orange, Jessica prepared for what would become the most terrifying experience of her life. She had no way of knowing that her peaceful research mission was about to turn into a nightmare that would test her survival instincts and change her perspective on the ocean forever. The calm waters and gentle giants she had been observing would soon reveal a completely different side of nature's power. The decision that changed everything happened at exactly 6:47 p.m. Jessica had been observing the orcas for over 4 hours, completely mesmerized by their behavior. The pod had been feeding successfully, and she wanted to capture underwater footage of their hunting techniques. Despite Dr. Fleming's initial hesitation, Jessica convinced the team that a brief diving session would provide invaluable research data. Jessica suited up in her diving gear, double-checking every piece of equipment. Her underwater camera was secured to her wrist, and she carried additional recording devices to document the orca's vocalizations from below the surface. The water temperature was a chilly 58 degrees Fahrenheit, but her thick wetsuit would protect her from the cold. She had dived in similar conditions many times before and felt completely confident about the mission. Captain Wright positioned the research vessel approximately 100 yards away from the feeding orcas, ensuring they wouldn't disturb the pod's natural behavior. Jessica entered the water slowly, allowing herself to acclimate to the temperature and underwater environment. The visibility was extraordinary, extending nearly 80 feet in all directions. Shafts of golden sunlight penetrated the water, creating an almost magical underwater landscape. Swimming at a depth of 30 feet, Jessica began filming the orcas from what she considered a safe distance. The pod continued their coordinated hunting, seemingly unaware of her presence. She watched in fascination as they used sophisticated techniques to trap schools of herring against the surface, then took turns feeding on their catch. Their intelligence and teamwork were even more impressive when observed from underwater. For the first 20 minutes, everything went according to plan. Jessica captured stunning footage of the orcas' hunting strategies and recorded their underwater vocalizations. The sounds were unlike anything she had heard before, a complex symphony of clicks, whistles, and calls that seemed to coordinate every aspect of their group behavior. She felt privileged to witness these magnificent creatures in their natural element. The situation began to change when Jessica noticed the orca's behavior shifting. The large matriarch that had been leading the pod started swimming in wider circles, occasionally approaching Jessica's position before veering away. At first, Jessica interpreted this as natural curiosity. Many marine mammals showed interest in human divers, and she had experienced similar encounters with dolphins and seals. However, the matriarch's behavior became increasingly aggressive. Instead of maintaining the respectful distance typical of most whale encounters, she began making direct approaches toward Jessica. Each pass brought the massive creature closer, and Jessica could see the intelligence and calculation in the orca's dark eyes. Something had changed in the dynamic between human and whale, though Jessica couldn't understand what had triggered this shift. Jessica signaled to the research vessel that she was ready to surface, but before she could begin her ascent, the matriarch made a sudden, swift movement toward her. The orca approached from behind, and Jessica only became aware of the danger when she felt the water displacement created by the creature's massive body. She turned just in time to see 25 feet of pure muscle and power bearing down on her position. The first contact was almost gentle, as if the orca were testing Jessica's response. The creature nudged her with its rostrum, the bony projection at the front of its head. Jessica felt like she had been hit by a moving car, the impact sending her tumbling through the water despite the seemingly gentle nature of the touch. Her regulator was knocked from her mouth, and she had to fight to retrieve it and restore her air supply. Jessica tried to swim away, but the orca followed her movements with ease. The creature's speed and agility in the water made escape impossible, She realized with growing terror that she was completely at the mercy of an animal that could crush her without effort. The matriarch circled her repeatedly, each pass closer than the last, as if deciding what to do with this strange intruder in her domain. The other members of the pod began to take interest in the interaction. Jessica found herself surrounded by multiple orcas, each one capable of ending her life with a single movement. Their size was overwhelming when experienced up close, and she felt smaller and more vulnerable than ever before. The water around her seemed to vibrate with their vocalizations, a haunting chorus that filled her with dread. Above the surface, the research team had lost visual contact with Jessica. Captain Wright frantically maneuvered the vessel, trying to locate her position. Dr. Fleming called out instructions to the crew, preparing emergency diving equipment in case a rescue became necessary. They could see the orca's behavior had changed dramatically, with the entire pod now concentrated in a small area where Jessica had disappeared. Jessica's situation deteriorated rapidly when the matriarch made another approach, this time with obvious aggressive intent. The massive creature opened its jaws, revealing rows of cone-shaped teeth, each one 3 inches long and designed for gripping prey. Jessica could see directly into the orca's mouth and throat, understanding that she was looking at her potential death. The attack, when it came, was swift and terrifying. The matriarch grabbed Jessica around the waist with her powerful jaws, applying just enough pressure to hold her without immediately causing fatal injuries. Jessica felt the teeth penetrating her wetsuit and drawing blood, but she remained conscious and aware. The orca began to shake her back and forth, the motion so violent that Jessica thought her spine might snap. In that moment of absolute terror, Jessica understood that she was experiencing the same fate that had befallen seals and other prey animals. The orca was treating her like food, and there was nothing she could do to change that perception. Her underwater camera continued recording automatically, capturing footage that would later provide crucial evidence of the attack. Jessica's world had become a nightmare of crushing pressure, cold water, and the certain knowledge that death was only moments away. The pain was unlike anything Jessica had ever experienced. The orca's teeth had penetrated through her wetsuit and into her flesh, creating deep puncture wounds around her torso. Blood began clouding the water around her, and she could taste the metallic flavor in her mouth despite her breathing regulator. The creature's jaw pressure was carefully controlled, enough to hold her securely but not immediately fatal. Jessica realized the orca was playing with her, the same behavior she had observed when studying their hunting patterns with seals. Jessica's training as a marine biologist kicked in even through her terror. She knew that struggling would only trigger the orca's predatory instincts further. Instead, she tried to remain as still as possible, hoping the creature might lose interest and release her. However, the matriarch seemed determined to investigate this unusual prey thoroughly. The orca began to carry Jessica deeper into the water, away from the surface and the safety of the research vessel. At 45 feet below the surface, Jessica's situation became critical. Her air supply was running low due to her panicked breathing, and the increasing water pressure made every breath more difficult. The other orcas in the pod circled around them, their massive bodies creating a living prison that blocked any escape route. Jessica could hear their vocalizations growing more excited, as if they were communicating about this strange new plaything their matriarch had captured. The orca suddenly released Jessica from her jaws, but instead of swimming away, she began to push Jessica around with her massive head. The creature seemed fascinated by Jessica's unusual appearance and behavior. Unlike the seals and fish the pod normally hunted, Jessica didn't try to flee in panic. Her scientific background had taught her that many animal attacks resulted from fear or misunderstanding, and she hoped her calm behavior might confuse the orca enough to create an opportunity for escape. Jessica's hopes were crushed when the matriarch grabbed her again, this time by her left leg. The orca's teeth scraped against her thigh bone, and Jessica felt certain the bone would snap under the pressure. She involuntarily screamed into her regulator, the sound muffled by the water but still audible to the creatures surrounding her. The scream seemed to excite the orcas further, and they began vocalizing more intensely. Above the surface, the research team had finally spotted the commotion. Captain Wright could see the churning water and occasional glimpses of the Orca's distinctive black and white markings. Dr. Fleming was preparing to dive herself when one of the junior researchers spotted Jessica's air bubbles breaking the surface, nearly 100 yards away from their current position. The captain immediately gunned the engine, racing toward Jessica's location. The HMS Endeavour's approach seemed to agitate the Orcas even more. The matriarch released Jessica's leg and began swimming in aggressive patterns around her, as if defending her prize from the approaching vessel. Jessica found herself caught in the middle of what appeared to be a standoff between the Orca pod and the research team. She used this brief respite to check her air gauge and was horrified to discover she had less than 10 minutes of breathing gas remaining. Jessica made a desperate decision to try communicating with the Orcas, using vocalizations she had studied in captivity. She began tapping her diving knife against her air tank, creating rhythmic metallic sounds that carried well through the water. The Orcas immediately responded to these sounds, their own vocalizations changing in pitch and frequency. For a moment, Jessica thought she might have found a way to establish peaceful contact with her captors. Her hope was short-lived. The matriarch interpreted Jessica's sounds as a challenge rather than an attempt at communication. The massive creature charged directly at Jessica, her mouth wide open and her eyes fixed on her target. Jessica barely had time to raise her arms protectively before the Orca struck her with tremendous force. The impact sent Jessica spinning through the water like a rag doll, her diving equipment scattered by the collision. Jessica's mask was torn from her face, and she found herself struggling to see clearly in the murky water. Her regulator had been knocked loose again, and precious air bubbled away toward the surface while she fumbled to retrieve it. The Orca circled back for another attack, and Jessica realized that the creature's behavior had escalated beyond curiosity or play. This was now a genuine predatory assault, and she was running out of time and options. The other Orcas began to participate more actively in the attack. A large male approached from Jessica's right side while the matriarch continued her frontal assault. Jessica found herself trapped between multiple tons of aggressive marine predators, each one capable of crushing her instantly. Her scientific mind noted the remarkable coordination between the animals, even as her survival instincts screamed at her to find some way to escape. Jessica's wetsuit was now torn in multiple places, and the cold North Sea water was beginning to affect her core body temperature. Hypothermia would become a serious concern if the attack continued much longer. She could feel her strength ebbing as the combination of blood loss, cold exposure, and terror took their toll on her body. Her movements became slower and less coordinated, making her even more vulnerable to the Orca's continued harassment. The research vessel drew closer, but Jessica could see that Captain Wright was struggling with how to intervene without making the situation worse. The Orcas clearly viewed the boat as a threat, and any aggressive action might trigger an even more violent response toward Jessica. Dr. Fleming was shouting instructions that Jessica couldn't hear over the sound of rushing water and Orca vocalizations. Jessica's air supply dwindled to critical levels. She began to accept that she might not survive this encounter. The ocean that had been her life's passion was about to become her grave. She thought about her family, her research, and all the things she would never accomplish. The irony wasn't lost on her that she would die studying the creatures she had devoted her career to understanding. In her final moments of consciousness, Jessica wondered if she had somehow misunderstood these magnificent animals all along. 26-year-old Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thornfield of Her Majesty's Royal Navy had been conducting routine maritime patrol exercises when the emergency distress call crackled through his radio. The HMS Vigilant, a fast patrol vessel under his command, was conducting training maneuvers just 15 miles from the research vessel's position. Marcus had served 8 years in the Royal Navy, with extensive experience in sea rescue operations and maritime emergency response. The distress call was unlike anything Marcus had heard before. Captain Wright's voice carried a level of panic that immediately caught his attention. A civilian researcher was under attack by a pod of killer whales, and the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Marcus knew that every second counted in maritime emergencies, and he immediately ordered his crew to change course and proceed at maximum speed toward the coordinates provided. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, Marcus's second-in-command, quickly plotted their course while Petty Officer James Harrison prepared the rescue equipment. The HMS Vigilant was equipped with advanced rescue gear, including high-powered water cannons, emergency diving equipment, and a fast-response inflatable boat. Marcus had trained for countless emergency scenarios, but a killer whale attack was not something covered in standard naval rescue protocols. As the HMS Vigilant raced across the North Sea at 35 knots, Marcus radioed ahead to Captain Wright for a status update. The news was grim. Jessica Radcliffe had been underwater for nearly 8 minutes, far longer than her air supply should have lasted. The research team could see the orcas still circling in the area where she had disappeared, but they had lost visual contact with Jessica herself. Marcus arrived at the scene to find chaos. The research vessel HMS Endeavour was positioned precariously close to the agitated orca pod, with Dr. Fleming and her team frantically preparing diving equipment. The water around the vessels was stained with blood, and Marcus could see at least 7 adult orcas displaying aggressive behavior. Their massive dorsal fins cut through the surface as they maintained their formation around their presumed prey. Without hesitation, Marcus assessed the tactical situation. His military training had taught him to evaluate threats quickly and decisively. The orcas were clearly protecting something beneath the surface, and their behavior indicated they would attack anything that entered their territory. Standard rescue protocols would be useless in this situation. Marcus needed to create a diversion that would force the orcas to abandon their victim without putting additional lives at risk. Marcus ordered his crew to deploy the water cannons, powerful devices normally used for riot control and fire suppression. However, instead of aiming directly at the orcas, he directed the high-pressure streams into the water around them. The intense water displacement created confusion among the pod, disrupting their coordinated behavior and causing them to temporarily scatter. The distraction worked better than Marcus had hoped. 2 of the younger orcas immediately moved away from the area, apparently startled by the unfamiliar sensation of the pressurized water streams. However, the matriarch and 2 other adults remained in position, continuing to guard whatever they had captured beneath the surface. Lieutenant Mitchell spotted Jessica first. A brief glimpse of her bright yellow diving tank appeared approximately 50 feet from the HMS Vigilant's stern. Jessica was barely conscious, floating just below the surface with one arm extended upward in a desperate attempt to reach air. Her breathing regulator had been torn away and she was drowning in the middle of the orca pod. Marcus made a split-second decision that would define his military career. Against all standard naval procedures, he dove directly into the water without waiting for backup or safety equipment. His years of naval training had included extensive water survival and rescue techniques, and he was an expert swimmer. However, jumping into the middle of an aggressive orca pod was beyond anything he had ever attempted. The water was shockingly cold, even through Marcus's naval uniform. He could see Jessica clearly now, floating limply about 20 feet away from his position. Blood from her wounds had attracted the attention of the orcas, and Marcus realized he was entering their feeding territory. The matriarch immediately noticed his presence and began swimming toward him with obvious hostile intent. Marcus had to reach Jessica before the orcas could mount another attack. He swam with powerful strokes, using every technique he had learned during his naval training. The distance seemed enormous, and he could feel the massive creatures moving through the water around him. Their size was overwhelming, and Marcus understood that he was completely outmatched in terms of strength and speed. The matriarch reached Marcus first, approaching from his left side with her mouth partially open. Marcus could see the creature's teeth and knew that a single bite could end his life instantly. Instead of trying to fight or flee, Marcus did something that surprised even himself. He maintained eye contact with the orca and continued swimming steadily toward Jessica, showing no signs of fear or aggression. The orca seemed confused by Marcus's calm behavior. Instead of attacking immediately, she began circling him, apparently trying to understand this new threat to her territory. Marcus used this hesitation to close the distance to Jessica, finally reaching her position just as her body began to sink beneath the surface. Jessica was unconscious and not breathing when Marcus grabbed her. Her wetsuit was torn in multiple places, and he could see serious bite wounds on her torso and legs. Blood loss and oxygen deprivation had taken their toll, and Marcus wasn't certain she was still alive. He wrapped his arm around her chest and began swimming toward the surface, knowing that the orcas could attack at any moment. The ascent seemed to take forever, though it probably lasted less than 30 seconds. Marcus could feel the orcas moving. Beneath them, their massive bodies creating pressure waves in the water. He expected to feel teeth sinking into his legs at any moment, but somehow the attack never came. Perhaps the orcas were confused by the presence of multiple humans, or maybe they had lost interest in their original prey. Marcus broke the surface with Jessica in his arms, immediately checking for signs of life. She was pale and motionless, with no detectable pulse or breathing. Water poured from her mouth and nose, and Marcus realized she had been drowning for several minutes. He began treading water while attempting to clear her airway, knowing that every second of delay reduced her chances of survival. The HMS Vigilant was already moving toward their position, with Lieutenant Mitchell coordinating the rescue from the bridge. Marcus could hear the engines roaring as his crew prepared to extract them from the water as quickly as possible. However, the orcas were still circling nearby, and Marcus knew they weren't safe until they were completely out of the water. The rescue operation became a race against time, as Marcus held Jessica's lifeless body at the surface. Lieutenant Mitchell had positioned the HMS Vigilant perfectly, but getting both victims aboard while surrounded by agitated orcas presented an enormous challenge. The matriarch was still circling nearby, and Marcus could see her massive dorsal fin cutting through the water less than 20 feet away. Petty Officer Harrison threw a rescue line toward Marcus, but the first attempt fell short. The second line reached him, but as Marcus grabbed it with his free hand, the largest male orca in the pod suddenly surfaced directly between him and the naval vessel. The creature's massive bulk displaced hundreds of gallons of water, creating waves that threatened to separate Marcus from Jessica's unconscious form. Marcus made a critical decision to abandon the rescue line and instead swim toward the HMS Vigilance stern, where an emergency boarding ladder had been deployed. This meant exposing himself and Jessica to the orcas for additional precious minutes, but it was the only way to avoid the aggressive male that was blocking their primary rescue route. Every stroke through the cold water felt like it might be his last. Jessica's body was becoming increasingly heavy as Marcus's strength began to fail. The combination of cold water, physical exertion, and adrenaline was taking its toll on his endurance. He had been in the water for nearly 6 minutes, and hypothermia was beginning to affect his coordination. His military training helped him maintain focus, but he knew his window of opportunity was closing rapidly. The orca's behavior continued to be unpredictable and dangerous. Just as Marcus reached the boarding ladder, the matriarch made another aggressive approach from behind. Marcus felt the creature's massive body brush against his legs, a terrifying reminder of how easily she could crush him. He pushed Jessica toward the ladder and shouted for his crew to pull her aboard immediately. Lieutenant Mitchell and 2 other sailors grabbed Jessica's arms and hauled her onto the deck with one coordinated movement. Water poured from her mouth and nose, and she showed no signs of breathing or consciousness. Marcus was right behind her, climbing the ladder as quickly as his exhausted muscles would allow. The matriarch's head appeared at the surface just feet away from the ladder, her dark eyes fixed on the humans who had stolen her prey. Once aboard the HMS Vigilant, Marcus immediately began administering CPR to Jessica. Her skin was pale and cold, with a bluish tinge around her lips that indicated severe oxygen deprivation. Marcus had been trained in advanced first aid during his naval service, and he knew that Jessica's chances of survival decreased dramatically with every passing minute without oxygen to her brain. Dr. Fleming and Captain Wright brought their research vessel alongside the HMS Vigilant, and Dr. Fleming climbed aboard to assist with Jessica's medical care. As a marine biologist, she had extensive first aid training and experience treating diving-related injuries. Together, Marcus and Dr. Fleming worked frantically to restart Jessica's breathing and circulation. After what felt like hours, but was actually only 2 minutes of CPR, Jessica suddenly coughed up a massive amount of seawater and began breathing on her own. Her first conscious words were barely whispered, but Marcus could make out her saying the matriarch over and over again. She was clearly traumatized by her encounter with the orcas, but she was alive and responsive. Jessica's physical injuries were severe but not immediately life-threatening. The orca's teeth had created multiple puncture wounds around her torso and left leg, and she had lost a significant amount of blood. However, the creature had apparently been careful not to inflict fatal damage, possibly because Jessica represented an unfamiliar type of prey that confused the orca's normal hunting instincts. Marcus radioed for immediate medical evacuation while Dr. Fleming worked to stabilize Jessica's condition. A Royal Navy helicopter was dispatched from the nearest coastal base, with an estimated arrival time of 30 minutes. Jessica would need emergency surgery to repair the puncture wounds and treat her injuries, but her vital signs were gradually improving. The orcas remained in the area throughout the rescue operation, apparently reluctant to abandon their territory. Marcus ordered his crew to maintain a safe distance while continuing to monitor the pod's behavior. The creatures seemed less aggressive now that their prey had been removed, but they continued to circle the vessels with obvious curiosity about the humans' activities. As they waited for the medical helicopter, Jessica began to regain more consciousness and coherency. She was able to provide Marcus and Dr. Fleming with details about the attack, describing how the matriarch had seemed to be studying her, rather than simply trying to kill her quickly. Jessica's scientific background allowed her to analyze her own near-death experience with remarkable objectivity. Jessica's underwater camera had continued recording throughout the entire attack, capturing footage that would later become crucial for understanding orca behavior in the wild. The video showed the remarkable intelligence and coordination of the pod, as well as the careful way the matriarch had handled her unusual prey. Marine biologists around the world would later study this footage to better understand killer whale cognition and hunting strategies. Marcus stayed with Jessica throughout the helicopter evacuation, ensuring she remained conscious and stable during the flight to Newcastle General Hospital. His quick thinking and heroic actions had saved Jessica's life, but he remained humble about his role in the rescue. In interviews later, Marcus would simply say that he had done what any naval officer would do in the same situation. The incident made international headlines within hours of Jessica's rescue. News organizations around the world reported on the killer whale attack and the dramatic rescue by the Royal Navy. Marine parks and aquariums began reviewing their safety protocols, while researchers debated whether the attack represented normal orca behavior or an unusual incident triggered by specific circumstances. Jessica's survival was considered miraculous by the medical team that treated her injuries. She had been underwater without breathing for nearly 4 minutes, suffered multiple traumatic wounds, and experienced severe hypothermia. Her recovery would require months of physical therapy and psychological counseling, but doctors expected her to make a complete recovery. Marcus received commendations from both the Royal Navy and civilian authorities for his heroic actions. However, he maintained that Jessica's own knowledge and calm behavior during the attack had been equally important to her survival. The incident strengthened Marcus's commitment to maritime rescue operations and reinforced his pride in serving with the Royal Navy's emergency response teams. 3 months after the attack, Jessica Radcliffe stood at the window of her hospital room at Newcastle General Hospital, watching ships move across the harbor in the distance. Her physical recovery had progressed better than anyone expected, though she still bore the scars from the orca's teeth along her torso and left leg. The puncture wounds had healed cleanly, leaving behind permanent reminders of her encounter with one of nature's most powerful predators. The psychological impact had proven more challenging than the physical injuries. Jessica experienced recurring nightmares about being trapped underwater, surrounded by massive black and white shapes. The sound of rushing water or even running faucets could trigger panic attacks that left her shaking and breathless. Dr. Sarah Pemberton, her trauma counselor, assured her that these reactions were normal responses to such a traumatic experience. However, Jessica's passion for marine biology remained undiminished. If anything, her encounter with the orcas had deepened her fascination with these intelligent creatures. The underwater footage from her camera had provided unprecedented insights into killer whale behavior, and marine biologists worldwide were requesting copies for their research. Jessica had become an unwilling celebrity in the scientific community, with universities and research institutions eager to hear her first-hand account. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thornfield visited Jessica regularly during her recovery, and they had developed an unlikely friendship. Marcus had been awarded the Queen's Gallantry Medal for his heroic actions, though he remained characteristically modest about his role in the rescue. He often brought Jessica books about naval history and maritime rescue operations, subjects that had become increasingly interesting to her since the incident. The investigation into the Orca attack had revealed fascinating details about the pod's behavior. Marine biologists determined that the matriarch was an estimated 40-year-old female who had likely never encountered a human diver before. Her initial aggression may have been triggered by Jessica's unusual appearance and behavior, which didn't match any of the Orca's known prey categories. The creature's careful handling of Jessica suggested intelligence and curiosity, rather than simple predatory instinct. Dr. Fleming visited Jessica with exciting news about the research implications of her experience. The footage Jessica had captured was being analyzed by computer specialists who could break down the Orca's vocalizations frame by frame. Initial findings suggested that the pod had been communicating extensively during the encounter, possibly discussing how to handle this strange new creature in their territory. Jessica made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She wanted to return to the ocean as soon as her doctors cleared her for diving. The attack had not destroyed her love of marine life, but rather had given her a deeper respect for the power and intelligence of the creatures she studied. She understood now that humans were visitors in the ocean, not masters of it. Captain Wright from the HMS Endeavour offered Jessica a permanent position leading a new research program focused on human-whale interactions. The program would use advanced, remote observation techniques, keeping human researchers at safe distances while still gathering valuable scientific data. Jessica accepted the position enthusiastically, seeing it as an opportunity to continue her work while promoting safer research methods. Marcus was preparing to return to his regular naval duties when he received an unexpected assignment. The Royal Navy was establishing a new maritime rescue training program, and they wanted Marcus to help develop protocols for unusual emergency situations. His experience with the Orca rescue had demonstrated the need for flexible thinking and rapid response in unexpected circumstances. The friendship between Jessica and Marcus continued to grow stronger as they both processed their shared traumatic experience. Marcus understood the weight of responsibility that came with saving someone's life, while Jessica grappled with the knowledge that she owed her existence to his split-second decision to dive into dangerous waters. They supported each other through the difficult months of recovery and adjustment. 6 months after the attack, Jessica published a groundbreaking research paper titled Killer Whale Cognitive Response to Novel Prey, a Survivor's Analysis. The paper combined her scientific observations with the emotional reality of being studied by one of the ocean's apex predators. It became one of the most cited marine biology papers of the year, and established Jessica as a leading expert on human-whale encounters. The orca pod that had attacked Jessica was spotted several more times in North Sea waters, but they showed no further aggressive behavior toward human observers. Marine biologists theorized that the matriarch had satisfied her curiosity about humans and no longer viewed them as potential prey or threats. The pod continued their normal feeding and migration patterns, apparently unaffected by their encounter with Jessica. Jessica's first return to the ocean came exactly 1 year after the attack. She had insisted on diving at the same location where she had nearly died, believing it was important to confront her fears directly. Marcus accompanied her on the HMS Vigilant, providing security and moral support for what everyone recognized as a crucial moment in her recovery. The dive went perfectly. Jessica spent 30 minutes underwater, filming seals and documenting fish populations without incident. When she surfaced, she was crying with joy and relief. The ocean was still, her home, and she had reclaimed her right to explore its depths. Marcus watched from the deck of his vessel, smiling at Jessica's obvious happiness and pride in overcoming her trauma. 2 years later, Jessica and Marcus announced their engagement during a joint press conference about maritime safety protocols. Their relationship had grown naturally from mutual respect and shared experience into something deeper and more meaningful. Jessica joked that it was probably the only romance in history that began with a killer whale attack, while Marcus noted that he had found his life's purpose in protecting the woman he loved. The Jessica Radcliffe Marine Safety Foundation was established with funding from international conservation organizations and the British government. The foundation developed new protocols for marine researchers working with large cetaceans, emphasizing respect for wildlife while maintaining scientific integrity. Jessica served as the foundation's director, using her experience to prevent other researchers from facing similar dangers. Marcus retired from active naval service to become the foundation's head of emergency response training. He developed comprehensive rescue protocols for marine emergencies, drawing on his experience with the Orca incident to create training programs that were adopted by navies and coast guards around the world. His work saved countless lives over the following decades. Jessica never encountered the matriarch again, though she often wondered about the intelligent creature that had nearly killed her. Sometimes, during quiet moments underwater, she imagined she could hear the distant calls of orcas in the deep ocean. She had learned to view the attack not as a malicious act, but as a meeting between two intelligent species that had misunderstood each other's intentions. The couple married 3 years after the attack, in a ceremony held on a beach overlooking the North Sea. Captain Wright performed the wedding ceremony, having become ordained specifically for the occasion. Dr. Fleming served as Jessica's maid of honor, while Lieutenant Mitchell stood as Marcus's best man. The wedding reception featured marine biology researchers, naval officers, and friends from around the world who had been touched by their extraordinary story. Jessica and Marcus eventually had 2 children, both of whom grew up with an unusual appreciation for ocean conservation and maritime safety. Their daughter, Marina, became a marine veterinarian specializing in whale rescue operations. Their son, Thomas, followed his father's footsteps into the Royal Navy, eventually commanding his own rescue vessel. The story of Jessica's survival became legendary in both scientific and military circles. It demonstrated the importance of remaining calm under extreme pressure, the value of scientific knowledge in crisis situations, and the heroism that ordinary people can display when lives are at stake. Most importantly, it showed that even the most terrifying encounters with nature can lead to greater understanding and respect for the world's magnificent creatures. Jessica continued her research for another 30 years, becoming one of the world's foremost experts on killer whale behavior. She never forgot that she owed her career, her family, and her life to the split-second decision of a young naval officer who chose to dive into dangerous waters to save a stranger. Marcus, in turn, credited Jessica's courage and scientific knowledge with making the rescue possible. Their story became a testament to human resilience, the power of quick thinking in emergencies, and the unexpected ways that tragedy can transform into triumph. The attack that nearly killed Jessica ultimately led to advances in marine safety, a deeper understanding of orca intelligence, and a love story that inspired people around the world to face their fears with courage and determination.